Awesome Possum kicks Dr. Machino's butt.
I'm awesome.
No. No, you're not. By the way, spoiler alert, he actually does it.
Awesome Possum kicks Dr. Machino's butt.
I'm awesome.
Again, no. No, you're not. Now, I will say this much. This game was ahead of its time. Something that nobody in 1993 would have appreciated and held in any high regard, but these days, it's become something of a national treasure. A hidden gem, if you will. For it is in the early blossoming years of the 21st century that Awesome Possum has become something of an institution and has gone on to live out its lifelong purpose. To be the subject of ridicule and mockery for uncreative people online to make stupid, unfunny videos to share with the world. With that having been said, expect an episode of The Angry Video Game Nerd in the near future to feature this game for roughly 5 minutes, while the rest of the 20-minute runtime is spent on self-indulging speeches of grandeur, attempting to make something out of nothing and failing miserably, and who knows, we might even have a fight with Mike Matei dressed in some ridiculous pedo bear costume or something else because they couldn't find a possum costume anywhere in sight. Cause hey man, those things are hard to find. But perhaps I'm being a bit too harsh. Not in regards to the nerd, that's the kind of thing I expect from him these days, but rather to Awesome Possum. After all, he was only an innocent little animal thing with lofty goals and good intentions, wanting to expand on his dream of a much cleaner world and global harmony. And if that meant going on an adventure that mocked the likes of other side-scrolling platform games featuring blue rodents, then goddammit so be it. Because this possum was awesome, and he was going to kick Dr. Machino's butt. Literally. It won't be easy though, since this possum has to traverse through 4 different worlds, each with 3 levels, before eventually challenging Dr. Machino himself in the Fortress of Garbage. And he'll have to fend off the machinations of the Machine Doctor by jumping onto them, use springs to propel himself to higher ground, and sometimes enlist the help of his animal friends to progress onwards in the level. Unlike that blue rodent, this possum has the intestinal fortitude to withstand several hits before meeting his demise in several ways. And unlike most other critters who need to collect 100 things to collect an extra life, this possum only needs to collect 50 recyclables. This also serves as a health boost if one cannot find a medical pack, one of several items that this possum can find, including temporary speed and jump boosters and of course, extra possums. You'll need to gather as much of these as possible because unlike those other critters, Awesome Possum has no continues. But he does have little quizzes that pop up between levels that, when answered correctly, earns you a cool 10,000 points, while answering incorrectly does nothing. You get funny reactions, but that's about it. And if you wanted to, you could forego the main game and just stick with the quiz. So you see, Awesome Possum gets a bad rap from people. He has good intentions, he wants to educate people on the environment, he wants to clean up the world, and even says so on several occasions. He has that drive, he has that determination, he has that fortitude, and he has that attitude. All essential tools in triumphing over the forces of pollution. But what this possum does not have is a good game. For as much of a good intention there was to be had with this game, this possum is marred with some very critical sticking points that negate those good intentions with such severity that it would cause some to question this game's double standard. Awesome Possum wants people to think about saving the environment, but instead, there's bound to be multiple landfills out there that features several hundred Sega Genesis video game cartridges with that Awesome Possum label, and unlike E.T. on Atari 2600, it has to share space with the rest of the world's trash. Such is life. Especially when life is hindered with questionable collision detection, confounding level design, shoddy controls, and an abhorrent lack of polish. And here I thought Captain Planet and the Planeteers for the Nintendo Entertainment System was the worst environmentally conscious video game I've ever played, but along comes Awesome Possum to set the bar even lower. This is a game that tries so hard to be Sonic the Hedgehog in regards to the high-speed hijinks and the bumpers and all that, but lacks the basic fundamentals and nuances that made the old Sonic the Hedgehog games such a visceral and enjoyable series of video games. Fundamentals such as good sound level design. The levels in Awesome Possum come off as having been designed by a 3-year-old who just got into game design and just tossed a bunch of elements onto the map without rhyme or reason, such as the occasional bed of spikes that are put in certain places because... why not? There are instances where I would be progressing through a level and then all of a sudden I would reach a dead end, forcing myself to backtrack several screens to find another way of getting through. Checkpoints are so scarce and so ineptly positioned that I often wonder if they were originally intended to be part of the game from the beginning or if they were just something added in at the last minute. It also doesn't help that the levels are designed in such a way that a great big sense of deja vu permeates every pixel of this map, lacking any distinguishing aspects that gives you a sign as to how far you're progressing in the level. It seems like an art form to build an entire set of levels using the same fundamental building blocks and make it feel like you're going somewhere. But it takes a true stroke of genius to build sets of levels using those same building blocks and make the player question whether they're running in circles. Fundamentals such as good solid hit detection, in that you're supposed to jump on enemies to kill them, but sometimes this doesn't always work, as your awesome possum will either whiff the target despite practically touching them, or, on more occasions than I would care for, actually take damage yourself and bounce around like an idiot, which makes the few boss fights in this game a particular joy. That may be a lie. There are occasions where I would take a hit from an enemy despite there being several inches of air between us, instances where I would fall through solid objects that weren't supposed to be secret passages, because those are a thing that exist here, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the precision involved in trying to jump onto a bumper or a springboard in order to propel me to higher ground. This is especially hazardous in the Arctic level, where if I don't land on a very precise spot on this floating ice thing, I'll end up taking damage from ice water, because this possum clearly didn't dress for the occasion. And that leads me to another missing fundamental: control. Look, there's not much to it. The D-pad moves Possum around and the 3 face buttons all jump. You know, just like Sonic. And if you hold down the jump button, Possum will just keep on jumping. You know, not like Sonic. And also, not like virtually 95% of the world's side-scrolling platformers. This of course poses a problem for people who like to hold on to that jump button until the jump is complete, since it offers a bit more control over the height of their jumps, but if they don't let go of the button when that possum lands, he'll just jump again. Usually into something stupid so that he could get hurt. Maintaining a firm grip over your possum at high velocities is like trying to convince Uwe Boll to stop making movies. The overall physics is a bit wonky as well, especially underwater. Shouldn't I be able to swim real fast and run like a sloth instead of running really fast and swimming slowly, or is this an awesome possum thing that completely escapes me? And while you could theoretically control said possum in mid-air, in practice, it lacks that precision that any good platformer is afforded. Hence why it's a bad idea to have very small hitboxes on slightly smaller ice sheets floating on dangerous ice water. Seriously, this is the one thing that has eaten up so many lives in my playthrough of this thing, with the only thing eating more lives being the boss fights, whose patterns are so innovative and so revolutionary that you'd be hard pressed to figure them out. Because they don't exist. And then there are details which are missing that polish to make it, well, workable. The scrolling is generally bad on its own with seemingly missing frames, but once your possum hits warp factor 5, it becomes unbearably horrendous. There are instances where the game will slow to a crawl, more of an issue in the underwater levels where there's a whole bunch of fish and electric eels and some other gimmicks on screen, and it just slows down to a practical crawl. And speaking of which, the swimming's pretty bad too. Apparently you could kill enemies by falling on top of them, but it's not always the case because of the questionable collision detection. Eventually, it just gets to a point where you'll just say fuck it and attempt to key in the cheat code that offers infinite lives, invincibility, and a level select. Hell, I'll admit I got to that point when I crapped out on the first level of Garbage Land because well, hell son, I made it to Garbage Land before I got a game over. That's pretty darn sad. But then even the cheat code has a hard time working half the time. For those interested, right after the possum lies on the title screen, just press C, B, C, hold left and B, and press C, and if you did it right, an annoying sound will play, and you just have to go to the options screen by pressing A and you'll have your extra cheat options. You're welcome, by the way. Awesome Possum's graphics are drab, generic, and uninspired. Never mind the missing animation frames that results in choppy scrolling, this is just unappealing to look at, whether it's the uninspired enemy designs or the lifeless level designs. Rainforest looks like a mountain of turd with some salad tossed in for good measure, the underworld is an eyesore with its blues and puke greens, and Garbage Land, well, it looks like garbage, so way to live up to that name. The Arctic is probably the most pleasant of the 4 levels to be found here, and that's not saying a whole lot. Look, there's not a whole lot else for me to say in regards to the overall visuals. Even the enemy designs are rather drab, generic, forgettable. You know, the bosses are kind of meh. But if there's one high point in regards to the character design, it's the Possum itself. It's rather lively. Sure, you could argue that I'm stretching here, and I fully agree, but he's got a lot of these cute little reactions whenever he trips over a piece of scenery or smashes into a wall. His multiple death animations are a sight to behold, and there's a nice bit where the Possum's mouth moves whenever he's talking, regardless of whether he's standing there, or running, or jumping, or juggling, or whatever. That's some real dedication to give that Possum personality. If only said dedication spread throughout the rest of the game to make it some semblance of good. Oh well. The one defining feature that most people know about Awesome Possum is the amount of speech featured here, primarily from the Possum himself, but you'll hear some voice bites from Dr. Machino. And as annoying as that might seem, and it is, don't get me wrong, it is something you could actually turn off in the options, or at least minimize if you don't want to outright kill the game's sole gimmick. And while the speech is nothing special and after a while starts to get repetitive and irritating to a point, you can at least understand it. The impressive feat here is that the vocals sound as crisp and clear as you could have gotten on the Sega Genesis, which had featured voice bites before in other games, but usually in this garbled, scratchy quality that makes you wonder why they even bothered. And again, to reiterate, the voice bites can be disabled outright if you don't want an instant let's play of your adventure, but then you're just left with the game's musical score, which sounds about as exciting as, well, watching paint dry. Actually, I'll lie, watching paint dry has some excitement and personality to it. The game music does not, but hey, at least you could turn that off in the option menu, but then you're just left with the mediocre sound effects. That, unfortunately, cannot be toggled in the options menu. You'll need a mute button on your remote control for that. Actually, you know what, on second thought, I do have some heat with Awesome Possum, if only because there's one piece of cliche in there that he brought up that served as a direct inspiration for one particular youngster who would go on to live by those 3 words for the rest of his life and become one of the most polarizing figures to be pushed down our throats, and it might have started with these 3 words.
Never give up! 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 Never give up!
Overall, Awesome Possum, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, is not very good. All the classic ailments of what makes a bad game can be found here. Poor gameplay mechanics, poor control, poor collision detection, lack of polish, subpar visuals, subpar presentation, generic sounds, and just an otherwise shoddy product. It's too bad that the effort made in giving a Genesis game clear voice bites was wasted on something this pathetically assembled, because it could have been put to better use in some other, more worthwhile video games. Bottom line, unless you have a YouTube channel or blog or any other online venture and you need easy material to pick on, or you simply hate yourself, I wouldn't suggest going out of your way to play Awesome Possum. There are plenty of other platformers featuring speedy rodents. Any of those will serve you better than this.
Oh, no!